the U.S. began to draw down. Now, interestingly, of course, the media is all over this. And they're all over it because it allows them to pressure the Biden administration from the right, to pressure them from a pro-intervention perspective. As I pointed out every time we've discussed Afghanistan, the media never really was critical from a non-intervention perspective. So, for example, when we bombed the civilian hospital in Afghanistan, killing a bunch of civilians, it was in the news for maybe a day or two, but it was out of the news pretty quickly. And there weren't these, outcries from the press to pull out and stop doing damage or to stop arming the Afghan army who helped us with that bombing. When we got the story about our allies being warlords with child sex slaves and U.S. soldiers blowing the whistle on our allies, that didn't lead to an outcry from the press for us to get out. When we got the Afghanistan papers, which proved that this thing is, a boondoggle, a quagmire, it's totally aimless. The only winners are the defense contractors, and, it's deep corruption going on there and profiteering. That didn't lead to a sustained outcry to get us out. So you'll notice a pattern here. When things are going wrong and it's because we're there, you don't hear any conclusions drawn, or it's in and out of the media very quickly. When things go wrong nominally because we leave, all of a sudden the media is all over it, and the heavy implication is, look at how irresponsible this is. We need to.
All right, so for those of you who don't know this guy, this is Kyle Kulinski. He's a social democrat who I watch. He's like who got me into leftist politics. But I don't understand, or I do understand a little bit why he hasn't made the jump to Marxism yet, but, I really want him to. I don't understand why he's still a social... I just said I do understand why he's a social democrat. I wish he wasn't a social democrat, but you'll hear him here doing what he always does, describing all of, the individual heinous details of what went on in Afghanistan as the U.S. was pillaging this country for resources, essentially setting up military bases in a sort of neo-colony, and he's explaining there all the different bombings that went on and all the different human rights abuses and all the different reports that were found proving that, of course, weapons contractors were heavily involved with the fact that we were there in the first place because they need war in order to sell money. Raytheon and Boeing need money, need war in order to sell weapons to the U.S. government. The U.S. government is something like 95% of the profits that those weapons contractors make, and the State Department officials are weapons contractors. So he's explaining all the individual details here, and then he's like, but corporate media, now they just want to stay in. They didn't want to get out of Afghanistan when all this horrible stuff was happening. They weren't critical when that was happening. They're only critical when we're getting out. Which is true, but then I don't get how he doesn't make the jump to a Marxist analysis of being like, okay, this is capitalist imperialism. The stage of capitalism that we're at right now is a stage of imperialism where the media apparatus is essentially set up not to act as media, but just to lie us into these various interventions that are, explicitly for capitalist expansion. And the only way to change that is, revolutionary struggle being waged within the imperial core, with from the workers who are being sent to fight and die in these pointless wars. And Kyle gives great analysis of the details of what's going on in these various places, but I wish he would have a little bit more of a theoretical structural analysis there. Something like Lenin's imperialism would help him out. He's a democratic socialist. Okay, yeah. Right.
You go back in. So I was nervous, and still to some extent I am nervous, that the more the media covers this, the more Biden is going to feel pressure, like he has to do something, like he has to put more troops back in Afghanistan. Now, again, to be fair, we don't know whether or not Biden will ultimately fully withdraw, take out all the contractors, take out even the U.S. soldiers who are training the Afghan army.
Sorry, I have to keep switching my mic on and off so it doesn't echo, but that is a really important point right there. So what it was published on the Gray Zone. I can't think of the reporter's name. We could even look it up right now. We can. Essentially what they found, that tons of trying to do two things at once here. Biden isn't ending the Afghanistan war, he's privatizing it. So what they're doing is leaving a bunch of Pentagon contractors and intelligence operatives, over 18,000 of them, to manage, because there's tons of export capital and other things set up there. like we said, imperialism is the current stage of capitalism. So there are all these economic and productive roots that the U.S. empire and the U.S. capitalists have tied to Afghanistan. So it's, very unlikely that they're actually just going to pull out, and completely give this place up. They're definitely pulling back, but they're still leaving tons of private forces there, special forces, mercenaries, and whatnot. And of course, Western media is not going to talk about that at all. I'm pretty new to Marxism. Can you explain the difference between MLs and MLMs? Eventually. I can. I mean, that's going to be a long story, though. Don't worry about it for now if you're new to Marxism.
You don't know. But as of right now, we left Bagram Air Base, which is, a really big step. And so I give Biden a lot of credit for that. And now with the Taliban advancing, you sort of sit there and watch, and you're holding your breath, and you're going, any day now, he might hit us with, well, we got to send more drones over there. We got to send more air power over there. We got to keep more troops on the ground than we thought we had to keep on the ground because the place is going to shit. And so, what are you going to do? I'm waiting for it. But really, my answer is always the same. I don't want to hear about Kabul or Kandahar until Flint, Michigan is taken care of. I don't want to hear about them until we get our infrastructure up from a grade of D or C minus or whatever it is now, according to the Society of Civil Engineers.
I mean, that's kind of like an imperialist argumentation point there from Kyle. Not imperialist because he's arguing against war, but he's like, I don't want to hear about Afghanistan until you fix Flint, Michigan. It's like, yes, true, but, imperialism is the current stage of capitalism, so, Flint, Michigan being impoverished is directly connected to the fact that all the money is being spent on ridiculous wars for capitalist expansion, because that's how capitalism works. Our state apparatus is controlled by the capitalists, so they're going to spend money on wars rather than spending it on Flint, Michigan. And I think, it sounds a little callous to our comrades in Afghanistan who have been fighting against this brutal U.S. occupation and, an occupation that's been going on ever since Afghanistan tried to stabilize themselves and set up a Marxist government with the help of the USSR. The U.S. has been intervening and trying to destroy everything they've been doing and trying to hold these people in poverty. So I obviously agree that we need to, pull out of Afghanistan and invest that money in fixing Flint, Michigan. It just sounds a little weird to be like, I don't want to hear, maybe it sounds like he's saying, maybe once we fix Flint, Michigan, then we go to Afghanistan. Like, no, we shouldn't go to Afghanistan regardless of what's going on in Flint, Michigan.
I don't want to hear about it. But guess what? Now, since the Taliban is advancing and taking over a bunch of places, this clip resurfaced. Now, I don't think I've ever seen this clip, but this clip was during the campaign. Biden went on Face the Nation, and he was asked a question basically about this exact scenario that we're seeing right now. Hey, if we withdraw, because you say you want to withdraw, Joe, if we withdraw and the Taliban starts advancing, don't you own that? Isn't that totally on you for drawing down? And this answer is, I don't know how else to say it, based Joe Biden.
The Washington Post quoted you this week in a story about Afghanistan, saying that back in 2010, you said to Richard Holbrooke, the then envoy, I'm not sending my boy back there to risk his life on behalf of women's rights. It just won't work. Not what we're there for. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah,
what did you mean?
What I meant was there's 1,000 places we could go to deal with injustice. I can think of 10 countries where women and or children and or people are being persecuted or being hurt. But the idea of us going to be able to use our armed forces to solve every single internal problem that exists throughout the world is not within our capacity.
See, here's why this isn't based Biden. Because, of course, Face the Nation here is trying to pressure him to be more imperialist, right? And they're doing woke imperialism, which, by the way, is becoming more and more of a problem. But can I debunk anti-leftist TikToks on Twitch? That's a great idea. That's an amazing idea for me to take all the anti-leftist TikToks that I get and debunk them on Twitch, because there's too many to just make TikToks about. That is a genius idea. Thank you. Okay, I don't want to forget that, but I do want to continue here. So obviously, Face the Nation is basically trying to do woke imperialism. Like, don't you want to stay in Afghanistan for women's rights? Like, that's really the reason we were there. Like, CBS News is so ridiculous. Like, they're really hitting Joe Biden with you're pulling out of Afghanistan and letting the Taliban take over. Like, don't you care about women's rights? Like, that's why the United States entered Afghanistan. What they've been doing there since 1979 is just really trying to build up their women's rights. Definitely has nothing to do with their oil, their mineral wealth. any of the other things that Western multinationals have been plundering out of Afghanistan. But here's why Joe Biden's answer isn't based, right? He's like, oh, there's a million other places around the world where injustices are going on, where the U.S. could be spending their time. And right after this, you see the protests in Cuba, and Joe Biden is talking about how communism has never worked, and the Cuban people need to overthrow their government for freedom and democracy, and blah, blah, blah. So this is what he means, right? He's saying, oh, we can pull out of Afghanistan, but that doesn't mean we're going to stop being the world police everywhere. And in fact, pulling out of Afghanistan is going to give us more money to spend, elsewhere, more resources to spend trying to overthrow the Cuban government, trying to overthrow the Chinese government. If we get out of Afghanistan, and it's looking like, they might eventually get out of Syria here completely. That's more resources that we can invest in regime change elsewhere. That's all he means. So it's not really based. They are being, I'm not saying the Taliban taking over is good. I'm just saying it's a product, one, of the U.S. destabilizing Afghanistan for 40 years now, and then occupying their country for 20 years, and the U.S. was not there in the first place to enforce human rights. And, if the U.S. had never gotten involved in the 80s and the late 70s, then it's very likely that Afghanistan would have a much more stable country than they do right now. Although they'd probably be being choked under economic warfare. But that's a conversation for another day, and we're speaking in hypotheticals.
The question is America's vital self-interest at stake, or the vital self-interest of one of our allies at stake? And the fact that they have a system in Afghanistan, as they do in parts of Pakistan, as they do in parts of other countries, that we're going to send troops because there is not, human rights are not being valued to the same degree that we are. That's a different story about sending combat troops. We should call it out. We should go to the United Nations. We should be saying, this is what's happening. We should try to shame and get the world to put pressure on, and economic pressure on people who countries engage in that, but not send troops. That's what.
Did you hear that? Did you hear what he did right there? Did you hear what Kyle called a based answer? That was Joe Biden calling for economic warfare rather than putting troops on the ground. The most recent and one of the most deadly strategies of U.S. and Western imperialism that's come about, it's been being built since post-World War II, since, the United Nations and NATO and the IMF and the World Bank and all these international political and financial institutions tied to Western capitalists came into existence that have allowed the U.S. to strangle countries, to use economic warfare. So what Biden's saying here is, we don't want to put combat troops on the ground, right? We're going to pull combat troops out of Afghanistan. That doesn't mean we're going to not put sanctions on Venezuela and Cuba and starve them under embargo, right? Like, that's much more humane because you don't see it. But in reality, he's saying, let's stop massacring people on the ground with our own troops, and let's start starving people with the international financial system that we've set up. And say, if you don't allow our capitalists to plunder your country, we're going to surround your country with our navy and our military, like Venezuela and Cuba are, and we're going to hold them under embargo. That's not a based answer. That's just Biden showing the new face of imperialism. The new strategy of U.S. imperialism is to use economic warfare rather than to put troops on the ground.
I meant. It is not sufficient. That was my point. And the idea was, and I think Richard had said something like, well, women are being abused there. I said, they're being abused a lot of places around the world. Are we going to send our American forces all over the world to make sure that stops?
But then don't you bear some responsibility for the outcome if the Taliban ends up back in control and women end up losing the rights?
No, I don't. Look, are you telling me that we should go into China go to war with China because what they're doing to the Uyghurs, a million Uyghurs out in the West in concentration camps? Is that what you're saying to me?
It was your quote, sir. I was asking you.
No, I know. I gave the answer. Do I bear responsibility?
Again, part of Biden's based answer here for Kyle is floating war with China because of what's been going on in Xinjiang. And I'm not going to go into a big rant about Xinjiang right here. I'm just going to give you all a quick resource. But the one good part about Biden's answer is that, of course, no, he doesn't actually bear responsibility, for anything that happens. Well, but Biden also was in favor of the Afghanistan war, so yes, he does bear responsibility. What am I even saying? Biden's been in the government forever. He was, I believe he was a senator at the time. And he never had any explicit votes in favor of the Afghanistan war, but I read a report a while back. It was clear, he was clearly in favor of it in the early 2000s. Of course he was. He was also in favor of the Iraq war. He was a big, calling for the war on terror and all this. So he's talking about how he doesn't bear any responsibility, but he's one of the people who argued for the war in the first place. And then if anyone wants more on Xinjiang, check out this from the Chow Collective. It's great. See here, tons of history. My take on Xinjiang is the U.S. has tried to infiltrate them for a long time, funding right-wing extremist groups, which is something the CIA and the U.S. have a long history of doing. China has tried to combat that with anti-terrorist education practices and basically turning Xinjiang into, increasing police presence and turning them into what you could basically call a surveillance state. But it's not, what the West is saying it is. It's not a genocide, and most of the scholars who have studied it have said that's actually offensive to call it a genocide compared to how horrible actual genocides are. And this is a great report for resources and compilations. I know that's a sensitive topic because nobody wants to be someone who denies a genocide that is real, but this is a great place to find information on it. All right. And Biden is I'm glad he's saying they don't want to send combat troops into China, so that's great.
Responsibility, zero responsibility. The responsibility
I thought he voted for the Iraq War. He did. Sorry, I gotta mute my microphone so it doesn't echo now.
I have is to protect America's national self-interest and not put our women and men in harm's way to try to solve every single problem in the world by use of force. That's my responsibility as president, and that's what I'll do as president.
I'm Richard Branson, and I have a once-in-a-lifetime invitation for you.
Oh no, it's Richard Branson.
Well,
I wish you would have jumped out of your spaceship, you Think of, it's the most obvious point to make as a socialist or a communist, but it's like so many people are starving, climate catastrophe is impending, all these wars are going on, and then we just got 2 billionaires trying to do a space race at the same time, and everyone's like, ooh, who will get to space first? And now they're advertising on Marxist channels. We can't escape these people. They've enslaved us. We need to get rid of them in a humane way in Minecraft. All right, continuing on.
Damn, son. Damn. Now, I'm not arguing Joe Biden made this point because he has ideological commitments to a non-interventionist foreign policy. We've seen him be interventionist in the past. So it's not even the case that it's, from a principle perspective or an ideological perspective that he's making this argument. I mean, it strikes me like he's honestly arguing this from a cranky old man perspective. Like, don't ask me something like that because you're trying to blame me for something and I don't take responsibility for that.
See, so Kyle's smart. He knows that Joe Biden has been pro-interventionist before. He knows this isn't actually Biden being based. But one of the main tactics, or not one of the main tactics, but a tactic that the U.S. always does, or that U.S. presidents always do, is yo-yoing troop levels. So they'll pull some troops out, and then they'll go and increase interventionist efforts somewhere else, right? We've all been talking about Palestine and Afghanistan lately, and then now this thing's going on with Cuba. And now everyone's focused on Cuba, and Biden's calling for regime change in Cuba. So they pull down troops somewhere, they decrease imperialist efforts somewhere, and they increase it elsewhere. And, I like following politics too. It's fun, but this is, it distracts the people like Kyle who are constantly watching politics, who are constantly obsessed with politics and following what's going on in the political scene. It's not necessarily wrong, but if you're reporting on it every day and every little thing that's happening and you don't have a broader sort of theoretical underpinning or theoretical perspective, I think you end up falling for these things because you're like, oh, Biden pulled out troops, now he put in troops, now this is going on with Cuba, and Kyle usually gets it right, like he's against Cuba, he's against the interventions in Afghanistan, but he makes small mistakes like this, like calling Biden based when Biden's saying, no, we need economic warfare, not troops on the ground. Like, that's not based.
Whatever his reasoning, I don't really care. This answer was based as hell. It's incredibly based. I mean, this is as good as you're going to get from any U.S. politician when it comes to foreign policy issues. And
no, Kyle, this is as good as you're going to get. That's so bad. One, that's not true. Like, Bernie is better than that, and AOC and them have been better than that. But two, especially you, Kyle, as someone who promoted, the and I promoted it too at the time, but I was like 21. We need to take over the Democratic Party by voting for enough people like AOC and Ilhan Omar, you know, and now you got AOC calling for like regime change in Cuba and propping up SOS Cuba. It's like we have to be more critical of these people. You know, they are politicians, so we can't, you know, when they say something like this, like we're pulling a few troops out of Afghanistan, we can't be like, oh, so base, like this is the best it's ever gonna get, you know, because it's not. It's just them distracting us so they can do something elsewhere, so they can increase regime change efforts elsewhere. You know, their long-term tactics never change. So yeah. Do you trust BBC? Absolutely not. Eddie, will China transfer to socialism in 2024? They're trying to by 2049, I believe. Why can't the USA keep to themselves? Because capitalists need to expand for money. Yes, Toad Tsunami, thank you. Also, I like that comment, Richard Branson and Bezos looking tastier by the minute. They really are. I saw a video of Jeff Bezos. Oh, let's watch that video after this video. Remind me to watch the video of Jeff Bezos' yacht. I saw it on TikTok, but hopefully I can find it on YouTube. All right, let's watch a few more minutes of this, then we'll go to something else.
And the problem here is the premise of the media. And this is a premise that's shared across basically all of traditional media, which is this idea that the United States is the world police. We should be the world police. It's our job to go around and...
Oh, I forgot to mute my microphone, sorry. But yeah, there you see Kyle getting it right again. You know, this is the premise of U.S. media, that we're the world police. Yeah, so their job, though, he's recognizing the role of the media, but he's not recognizing the interplay between the two, right? So the media goes, Joe Biden, don't you think we need to keep troops in Afghanistan? And Joe Biden goes, absolutely not. We need to get out of Afghanistan. Like, oh, okay. And he's like, but we need to focus on Cuba. And they're like, that's right. You know, it's a game that the media plays with these politicians that they're really good at, and it's to manipulate you know, smart, no offense, but smart people like Kyle who follow politics and who follow the media, but they don't, as I've been saying, have a theoretical underpinning or a Marxist thought underpinning their political thought. So they end up kind of hopping around and making mistakes in their political analysis. So let's try and find this Jeff Bezos yacht video.